All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Lecture 4 of Moana. And, this is a lecture series on Moana. And if you have not, watched the first 3 lectures to understand really the psychology behind where we're going here, then it's going to be up here. That link is going to be here. So, we're going to try to figure out Te Kā today. And we're also going to try to figure out Moana just a little bit deeper because, we're on to the next step. We're on to the next step, which is I find is a very, very important one. And this is really the understanding of yourself. And this is also, we'll try to parse out what's so special about a hero's journey. Because in the last lecture, I was purposely, we'll say, pessimistic. So just to kick up where we left off, we left off essentially at the point where Moana is like, all right, I know what my past is, and we were voyagers, right? We were essentially the thing that I want to be. And one point that I really want to hit on is the old crazy lady. I really like this. I like this archetype. I like this idea. You notice that in this movie, and you'll notice this throughout the whole thing, or at least throughout the part that up until she dies, the old crazy lady is the one that's right, and she's also the one that's ignored. That's such a common theme. That's such a common, we'll say, archetype's a good word, to explain the way that civilization acts. And we gotta first ask the question, why is it that the person who's right is ignored? And it's because of fear, right? Fear is a good way of saying it. And the inability to face your past, right? Because that's the problem with the father. The father had this problem, right, of facing himself and failing, so he turns into this. And the reality of it is, because of that fear, we suppress a part of ourselves. We suppress the part of us that's right. And it's a common archetype. I mean, if you've ever seen, 2 of the most popular film franchises that I've ever seen. I'm trying to think of any that are more popular. I don't think so. You got Harry Potter and you got Star Wars. What is the thing about Harry Potter? Harry Potter lives in a society of the logos, right? It's the same thing. It's the world that's too logical and the world that's too rational. Logos is the word that logical is derived from, and it's Greek. And the society is too logos, and therefore it ignores the spirit that exists within it. It ignores the natural part of the household that's within it, and that's what you see in Harry Potter, where the Dursleys, right, the family that takes in Harry Potter, essentially like his step-parents, are just treat him like absolute crap. It's representative because it shows that the Dursleys ignore the spirit within their kingdom, ignore the spirit within their household. It's the same idea with Star Wars, right? Anakin and Luke, right? Both of them are from Tatooine. And Tatooine is in, essentially, it's called the Outer Rim. It's the place that exists beyond the known territories, beyond the Republic, beyond civilization. And, that's where they find Anakin, Darth Vader, and Luke Skywalker, right? They find these people who exist outside of the known territories because people have ignored them. And that's the problem with culture. That's the problem with, culture is a good way of saying it. And the father here is a representation of culture, right? The problem is he's ignorant because of his, we could say blindness, right? We could say maybe fear, but just ignorant in general, Here's a modern example it's a theory that I'm working on, and I really, really like it. Well, first we'll start off with the idea of Freud, because I introduced the idea of Freud in the last few lectures. And Freud, his goal in life, it's a really funny concept, So his goal in life, he said, was to, quote, agitate the sleep of mankind. To, quote, agitate the sleep of mankind. He believes that we are all sleeping, and we're blinded, in this case, by our culture, right? By maybe our repressiveness, by whatever it could be. And his goal is to shake us out of it. And he didn't even say to wake us up, right? Because I think he's more realistic in that, in the fact that, first of all, a lot of his ideas were incredibly radical for the time. And the thing is, he did his job. Like, he did it right, He founded the idea of, what's it called? what's it called? Narcissism, right? He created narcissism. He popularized the idea of the unconscious. So, I mean, there are a lot of things that he did to agitate the sleep of mankind. He brought up these ideas that he's really passionate about, but a lot of his ideas aren't really accepted, and some of them are wrong. So maybe that's a good thing, And also he's in the 1800s, so that sounds about right. But his goal was to agitate the sleep of mankind, and the person that he's trying to wake up is a person like this, right? He's trying to wake up the repressive individual that only wants to stay within the bounds, right? That's the problem with the father. He wants, the song "Where We Are," right? He tries to essentially convince Moana. Here, right? He tries to convince her that no one leaves. You stay exactly where you are, and you don't have to venture out. You don't have to. Well, if we're going with ideas, right? If this is a metaphor for ideas, you don't have to go further than your bounds, further than your conscious understanding. You don't have to extend outside of this culture in which you're created, right? And that's the tyrannical aspect of culture. It doesn't want you to leave, and it doesn't want you to explore because, well, culture is afraid that it's wrong, which in some case it is. But if we're going to go with a very popular idea is the yin and the yang, this place has been completely, Moana's kingdom, essentially, has been completely taken over by the yang, which is order, right? But it needs a little chaos, and she's the representation of the chaos. The grandma is the representation of the spirit that lies within the kingdom, because even though you have this sleep, we could say, that exists amongst everybody, this repression that exists, you can't get rid of all of it. So that's why the grandma exists. And here's a good example that I was really thinking of. All right, we'll keep pushing on, and I'll integrate the example. So the archetypal idea here that the movie is trying to portray is Moana takes a look into her past, right? So she sees her culture, right? She sees her father, and she says, there's something wrong with what you're saying to me, father. And then what she says is, let me look back a little further, right? Let me look back into my biology. Let me look back into my ancestors, the parts that are a lot further back than I am. And, that's true genetically, right? Like, you're not just your father, you're your father's father and your father's mother, and then you just keep going back. So, that's a good way of saying that, first of all, you have genetic potential, right? A good way of saying it is, even though... Okay, so there's this idea, it's called the divinity of the individual, and the divinity of the child. And when you look at the child, we say that, oh yes, I explained this, right? The child has infinite potential, right? It could expand to literally every single bounds. It could cure cancer, it can, be an astronaut, it could literally be anything. And the reason why that is because every single one of your ancestors was reproductively successful. And that's a big deal. That's not a small thing, because when you think about it, there are, throughout history, 40% of all men and 80% of all women were reproductively successful. The rest died off. So when you think about it, for, a man, because a man's a lot rarer, right? Like 40% is tough. Like more than half of men died off without passing their genes on, and that's really because you have people like Will Chamberlain, who had sex with over I think it was like 15,000 women in his life or something crazy like that. You have one person dominates all of it. But when you have something like that, it shows that within your, every single one of your ancestors for the past 200,000 years, which is for as long humans existed, and maybe you could even go back for the last 3 million years, which is, how long, we could say cells existed, or maybe even further, definitely even further. But anyways, you could say, we'll go with 200,000. For the last 200,000 years, every single one of your ancestors, which we could say is probably somewhere in the millions, definitely somewhere in the millions, had something that made them worthy of passing their genes on to the next generation. Every single one. And that was passed down to you. And And that's a hopeful message, isn't it? Because even if your father, even if your mother, even if your grandparents were, well, we could say failures, right? Even if they failed, even if they were repressive like the father, right? Someone who went on his hero's journey and failed, right? Then that's okay. Because it might take a little bit more work, right? But you could look beyond and you could find that your genetic potential, let's say, when I say fail, like someone failed their hero's journey, you could say the father decided to become a lawyer, doctor, or accountant, right? When they really wanted to be an artist, right? But, well, that's the message. The message is if they failed their hero's journey, if they didn't go as far as they could go, if they didn't reach their potential, you still have that potential that lies inside of you because someone in your past did it. And someone was able to, well, essentially be your guide, be your model. And that's exactly what Moana figures out here. She figures out that, wait a second, I could be my potential, and my potential is not bound to the culture in which I exist. So, and then the grandma tells the story. She says, okay, this is a point where the children were happy, and the children were essentially nature and nurture, culture and biology matched, and things were going well, which is hopefully what you want if you're trying to create a good society. You want a non-repressive society, or we could say a natural society. Well, you don't want society to be too far away from nature. How about that? And in this case, the children, they were in touch with nature. They were one with their nature as children, which is good. They were exploring. And then you have Teka, right? You have this large creation of Teka, and obviously that was when the heart was pulled away from Te Fiti. And then darkness spreads, and it spreads to your kingdom. So let me use the example that I've been thinking about this for so long, and I think it's a perfect representation of Moana, and I feel like it's going to cause a lot of help in society. It's very, very unscientific, completely unscientific, but I still want to introduce my theory. So you look at almost all animals. Their teeth are really, really clean. Right? Like you don't see in nature animals losing their teeth to the time that they die. They're always, like we see like people who don't treat their teeth well, like humans, and their teeth fall apart. And they, like George Washington, right, was known for his wood teeth. And we got to ask the question, why is that? Why is it that across all of human evolution, or all of evolution, teeth have been well-groomed and well-kept? And the answer is pretty clear, right? The answer is that, like, if you have a dog, right, what is the reason why he likes to chew on things, right? He likes to sharpen his teeth on toys, and the reason why is because you have enamel that builds up in your teeth, and what happens is the enamel kills your teeth, right? The enamel is deadly, and it starts biting away at your teeth until it hits a nerve, and once you hit a nerve, you're done. So the purpose of the biting is to scrape off that enamel. Humans have that same purpose, and that purpose was created in toothpaste, right? Toothpaste does that same thing. It uses fluoride to scrape off the enamel and not allow for the enamel to build up and destroy your teeth, right? That's why we apply, well, toothpaste is really medicine, right? So why do we apply medicine for this long? But now you got to ask the question, before toothpaste existed, for about 200,000 years of human evolution, what did humans do to keep their teeth, right? To keep their teeth fine. I can't imagine that 100,000 years ago that humans were losing their teeth. Right? Why would we get worse over the genetic period? So I was thinking, and I came to the realization that we also bite, right? We also have this biting sensation to, so we also have this need to bite because we want to get rid of this enamel on our teeth. And even though we could say culture socialized out of that, You don't see, you see in monkeys, right? Monkeys have this, they chew on leaves constantly, right? They're always chewing on leaves, and humans don't do that, right? In polite society, that's not a thing. And I can imagine that dropped off somewhere around like 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, maybe 2,000, something very recent along the timeline of human evolution, right? That's essentially a period in the story in the book of humans. So then I realized, I said, okay, humans, our culture, right, says that we don't need to bite on things, right? Which would be biting on things is the natural human way of scraping off our teeth, right? But now we have toothpaste, so that doesn't really matter. But now the problem is, throughout all of human evolution, we have this need to bite, right? And this need to bite is essentially repressed, right? So you can imagine, let's go with the basic story that we've been going with original sin, Tefiti, life itself, our nature, is this need to bite. But then, once polite society came around, biting isn't something that we often do. It's really not, it's not that important. Or you could generalize it even, the need to just like constantly have something to chew on or something to have in your mouth. And then what happens is you have, tekah. So what would be the representation of tekah? And I've been trying to figure this out because I have a problem. I bite pens, right? So maybe not this pen, but if you give me a pen, like I'm always gnawing and I'm always destroying. And I have the same problem with, even when I'm working, I'm eating carrots and I'm eating nuts, right? I'm eating like roasted like cashews and all that. And I ask myself, why am I always biting on the two things, carrots and nuts, that are the most, the loudest and the loudest and the easiest to keep biting? It's not like I bite it for 20 minutes and then I stop for an hour. It's like I'm constantly biting on it the whole time. And then I realize that the reason why I do this is because I have this natural urge to bite. And now you ask the question, where does that manifest itself in society? First of all, gum, right? Gum is a relatively innocuous example of the need to have something in your mouth. But then what about obesity, right? The fact that we always need to have snacks and we're always constantly biting on snacks. Or what, like chips, right? That's exactly what chips are. That's what, I think chips is a good example. Pretzels, goldfish, like things that are unhealthy, but we just find ourselves sort of gnawing on them. And then also smoking, right? Smoking cigarettes and smoking nicotine products. Why do we do it? Partially because we just need to feel something on our lips. And our culture represses this idea of having something on your lips. So I've been trying to figure out how to stop biting pens, right? Because I don't really like biting pens, but then I'm left with this realization that it can manifest itself as tekah, right? Like for example, like I eat carrots and nuts, right? But what happens if I started eating chips? That's something that's really bad. So I've been trying to figure out something to bite on, and I figured that, I saw online they make these things called human chew toys, and that's exactly the idea. It's the idea of integrating that part of yourself instead of repressing it. Because what has our culture done? Our culture has repressed it, and now what you see is an obesity epidemic, and you see a lot of people who are smoking. And what is the reason for that? It's not because we, there's this misconception that we're like drug addicts as a culture, and we like to just constantly, like, we smoke to get high and we eat to feel pleasure. But it's not that simple. I think we do both of those things just to have the feeling of just to satisfy this urge that is completely, different from the rest of our being. It's not really pleasure per se, but that's tekah represented, And if you notice this within yourself, then you gotta ask the question, maybe stopping the biting, right, or the biting or the smoking or whatever you do, biting of fingernails. I have a friend who just gnaws constantly on their fingernails, and that's the same representation. So if you don't want it to manifest itself as tekah, you need to find some way for the biting to manifest itself in a better way. You can't just get rid of it completely, because when you get rid of it completely, then it manifests itself as tekah. So chewing gum, for example, is a pretty, like, there's really nothing wrong with chewing gum or like a chew toy, right? Or constantly chewing on, like, I don't know, spinach, carrots throughout the day. Like, maybe that's not a bad example, but you never know. So, well, that was just a theory. But anyways, we have, well, that's the darkness that presents itself when it goes into essentially your kingdom. And what is Moana's goal? The grandma gives Moana the heart. And she gives her the heart of Te Fiti, right? She says, it's your job to restore it. Here's your hero's journey. This is the call to adventure if we're going in the traditional hero's journey sense, right? This is the time where you accept your hero's journey, and Moana does, right? So things are going well. She's accepted it. But, well, she's at the point where she denied it because... Yes, she's at the point where she denied it because she still wants to be tribal king, or tribal chief, we'll go with, and she accepts her hero's journey. She says she's going to go and do it. The ocean, approves, right? Nature approves, which is, I like this idea. I like the idea that the ocean approves, and does a little fireworks celebration, because that's the idea, the idea of water is a representation of adventure, right? And the adventuring part of herself is satisfied. So that's pretty good. And, well, here's the best part. Here's the part that I absolutely love. So what happens... Ooh, all right, you ready? So what happens when Moana accepts her hero's journey, right? So we came to the conclusion in the beginning that the grandma is the representation of the spiritual side within the kingdom that is not being accepted by the kingdom itself. So it's she's the only person who sees beyond the culture, the oppressive culture, but nobody really gives her any attention because they're so focused on logic and the logos, right? But Moana now accepts her hero's journey. She takes on the grandmother, right? She takes the lesson from the grandmother and she embodies it in herself. And, well, that's the representation of the hero's journey, right? If the grandma is the representation of the adventurer, then her choosing to go on an adventure is her agreeing with or accepting the grandma as the part of her personality that is being expressed, you could say. And so what is the next thing that must happen? The next thing that must happen is the grandma dies. The grandma dies. Do you see this across so many lines of mythology? It's one of the... Well, I think this is the most applicable, and it's the one that makes the most sense, because, you ask the question, the grandma needs to always be expressing herself somewhere because the spiritual side is always alive. But once that becomes once that's integrated into Moana's ego, once that's integrated into herself, the grandma can die. And you ask the question of why, and it's because the grandma could die not because she physically dies, not because her soul doesn't live on, it's because her soul is integrated into Moana. Right? So you don't need the grandma anymore. The grandma as a character makes no sense because she is... Moana is the grandma, right? Moana is... Yeah. So the grandma accepts... Moana accepts the grandma into herself, and therefore we don't need the grandma anymore. And that's the... Well, that's the fundamental acceptance of responsibility. That's the idea. The idea is that you have some goal to achieve, right? There's some goal in your life some dream, right? Something that is calling you. And for example, my whole thing when I was a kid, and well, this is my eventual dream, so the dream that I'm pursuing, and it's the underlying belief behind all of the things that I do, is education in the areas, in impoverished areas. So ever since I was a kid, I would always be so interested in Detroit public schooling. Well, you imagine being a kid growing up in Detroit public school, and where literally you have teachers who just don't really care, students who don't really care, a terrible culture, and, well, the chance of making it out of there is almost zero. So You can imagine that's my ideology, right? Like, this is the thing that I really care about. This is my unique goal, or somewhat unique goal, that I am destined to pursue. You could say that's a good representation of it. Once that idea is represented in me, imagine I got it from like a documentary. I don't need that documentary, because I did get it from a documentary. I don't need to watch that documentary again, because that documentary integrates itself in me. And it's the same idea in a macro scale, you know? You imagine that, your parents or your culture or someone within your bounds, failed on their hero's journey, right? Somebody has tried to do the unique thing that you are trying to do before, right? Let's say you want to be an artist. And the thing is, most people don't want to be an artist. They want to share something with the world. So let's say you want to share some sort of message. You know, I love lyrical art. And for example, let's go to someone like who's a relatively loved character throughout. Let's take someone like Eminem. Is Eminem good? I think we could go with Eminem. You take someone like Eminem, and he had a distinct message that he had to share with the world. He had a hero's journey that he had to share with the world, and so many people have tried to do it before and failed, right? But he was the one who said, I am going to do it, and I don't care about all the people who have tried in the past, right? All the spirit that existed in the past that tried to do it before and are sort of holding on to this dream just to pass it down to the next generation. All I care about is doing it myself. I'm going to take on this burden. I'm going to take on this responsibility, and I am going to be the one who is going to achieve this goal, right? To achieve this this goal that is unique to me. You know, there's this idea of, do I have the book here? It's one of my favorite books, actually. It's called The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. I do not have it here. But the idea of The War of Art is... do I have it? Yes, I do. Here we go. This book, War of Art by Steven Pressfield, and it talks about this Greek mythological idea called the muse, and it actually changed the way that I look at, well, the world. You know, that's what a good book will do. And what it says is, there's this idea of the muse is, well, it's the representation of creativity. So imagine like a little fairy that goes around, and it's a little fairy that goes around and places little sparks of ideas in people's heads, right? So, you know, imagine... Ooh, I could really connect this. Okay, so you have the idea of these little fairies that essentially place ideas in your head, which is essentially just the process of coming up with ideas. You have this little spark that starts to come, and well, it's your choice as to whether or not you want to take that spark and turn it into a full idea, and then turn that full idea into an actionable practice, you know? So, for example, he said that Beethoven, whatever, I think it was like his 7th symphony that made him like really popular. You know, they say Beethoven's seventh symphony was put in from the muse. The first few notes were put in from the muse in about like 4,000 people, we'll say, you know, or 4 million people, whatever. We have no idea. But Beethoven was the only one who took those notes and decided to play something for it. Right? He was the only one who took this little spark, this little idea, and turned it into something that could actually manifest itself in the world. And that's a hero's journey right there. So the problem with the grandma is she was the muse, right? She had this idea that the culture is wrong, society is wrong, I actually have the right idea, but she never did anything about it, right? That was her fatal flaw. She never did anything about it, and therefore she wasn't able to, well, influence society and make society a better place. And, well, now you have someone like Moana, who's heard the muse. The muse is the representation of the grandma, right? Who's heard this idea and is willing to follow it. And is willing to take the action to go and do it, you know. Let's see if I could find a great example. Yeah, the idea of, you know, Which one should I go with? We'll go with the one of the idea of the periodic table of elements, because I found that this is the most fascinating one. So this guy, his name was it was some Russian name. I think his name's Mendeleev, but he had this idea that maybe we could take all the elements and maybe there's some sort of order that sort of comes with them. Maybe they actually come together and make some sort of sense. This is in the 1800s, so it's a radical idea. And what he'd do is he'd take all the elements and he put them in some sort of like cards, right? Imagine like little note cards, flashcards, and he spent like 5 years just trying to assort them, trying to figure it out. And then he spent something like 3 days without sleep, just trying to work on it, trying to figure it out. And in his sleep, he said he fell asleep and he woke up. And at the moment that he woke up, everything in his mind was perfectly ordered. It organized himself. His brain organized itself, the periodic table of elements. And then he said he woke up and all he had to do was write it down. All he had to do was take the message that his sleep told him, that is essentially like his dreams told him, and write it down, and he had the periodic table of elements. And he said the craziest part about it is he woke up, and you imagine, like, you think of dreams as something that are like incredibly wild and radical and don't really make sense. He said when he actually wrote it down, he said he only had to fix one thing. Everything else had lined itself out. And well, that's the idea of the muse. He had to go for the 5 years with of failure. He had to go for the 5 years of trying to sort it out. Every single person maybe got that original idea that maybe I could sort these elements into something that's important, something that's meaningful. But it was only the one guy who took 5 years, the hero who took 5 years to go and say, this is my purpose, I'm going to go and figure it out, and eventually it's going to come to me and I'm going to do it. And man, the amount of contribution that the periodic table has done is there's no quantifying it. And I don't think that anybody would have figured it out for maybe another 100, 200 years, which is like, I don't know if anyone would have figured it out, which is like, he fulfilled his calling, right? He received his muse and he fulfilled his calling. He integrated the muse into himself. And you could say he integrated the adventurous side, the hero side of him into himself. And that's what you do here. And this is what the grandma says, she says, there is nowhere you could go where I won't be with you. And that's perfect. That's the perfect archetype. It's like you can literally, well, we said before, imagine each of these people that are in here are personalities that exist within you, right? You could literally take all of the personalities that you have and pick one and integrate them into yourself. So imagine that she decided that she was going to be the tribal chief, right? She was going to be the tribal chief. If that happened, the father would have died, right? Do you understand what I mean, right? So I say that when you become that person, when you take on the lessons, when you decide to integrate when you decide to act out that personality within you, right? So if you decide to act out the stable part of your personality, then that part of you is integrated into you. And well, that's a good way of saying it. So let's see, is there anything else? Oh yes. This is the part that's lingering on my mind, and I think this is the most important point. No matter which of these personalities you choose, whether you choose to be the stable person, right? You choose to be the stable personality. You choose to be the adventurous personality. You choose to be the good guy. You choose to be the bad guy. You choose to be the the little chicken that makes his way around. You choose to be like dumb and, I don't know, choose the wrong path, whatever. Every single one of those paths that you choose, imagine you look at your future and you say there are about 100 different paths that I could pursue and therefore 100 different people that I could be. And that's the fundamental lesson. No matter which one that you choose, they're a representation of who you are. It's not like you one of them is you and the other one is not you. It's like every single one of them is a potential you. The dad is a potential version of Moana. The grandma is a potential version of Moana. And same for every single other character that exists, right? And you could choose which character that you want to be in. That's the process of maturity. That's the process of, well, Jung would call it individuation, right? You literally become yourself. And you choose which person you want to be. That's the most meaningful part. You literally decide, this is going to be the personality that I'm going to represent. Do I want to represent the hero? And that's why I wrote this book, right? The reason why I wrote this book is because you could choose to be the hero. And if you choose to be the hero, in my belief, that's the best archetype that you could be. So that's what she does. She integrates the grandma into herself, and therefore she chooses to be, well, the adventurer. The adventurer and hero are essentially, synonymous. So she chooses to be the hero. She decides to embark on the path of the adventurer, right? She decides to follow her heart, and well, that's a good way of putting it. And what happens is, well, nature hurts her, right? Nature says, you are, you're kind of screwed, and you decided to go in this, and you decided to be the hero, right? And, well, good luck. I'm going to challenge you, because that's a good way of putting it. So so here's the next topic, and this is something that I hope will be a little bit more hopeful, but I also hope that, it keeps it realistic. So this is the best way of putting it. So in the last lecture, I essentially detailed why the dad, right, the representation of security and anti-heroism is usually right. And I also detailed why pursuing your heart in the Disney sense, right, wishing upon a star, that idea is unrealistic. Or no, unrealistic is the wrong word. It's naive, right? It's naive, and that's the problem with the child, right? So Moana is obviously a representation of the child who wants to do something more than she is, and you see that in every single, well, hopefully, child hero story, right? You have Anakin Skywalker, you have Harry Potter, you have Lion King, you have pretty much every single Disney and Pixar movie, pretty much. And you have the representation of the child who goes out and looks like this, right? Who looks like the child who is going to pursue their goals and pursue their dreams and do everything that the world has to offer them and pursue their potential. But the problem is, and I detailed this in the last lecture, that we have no idea what's coming for us. 92% of people who pursue their dreams fail. 92%. And, well, that's a fundamental problem, right? The fundamental problem is not the idea of goals itself, but the fact that when this child within us, right, the child within us that when we go and work out, right, say we're going to work out more and eat healthier, does push-ups on the floor and wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning and works out for 3 days, 3 hours the next day, just with all the passion and energy that we have inside of us, that child that manifests itself within us is incredibly naive. It has no idea how far you're going to have to go, because you have no idea the obstacles that are in the way. We overestimate our ability to achieve. And, nope, sorry. So we overestimate our ability to achieve, right? And the problem with that is, well, the good thing about it is it lets us get started, right? It lets us get started, but the problem with that is we literally, well, overestimate our ability to achieve, and then it's as if we are on a boat that we know that is falling apart at the seams, but we choose to sail on anyways, and then when the boat sinks, we are just, and we fall into the water and we fall into chaos. We expect that, We realized that we were blind the whole time, and we weren't seeing the fact that it was falling apart, which is the problem, right? That's the problem with the hero, right? That's the problem with the hero, and that's the reason why most people fail, because, well, you see this in a child. In a child, what happens is, and this is what Piaget pointed out, and I got this from the Jordan Peterson lecture. I have not read Piaget yet, but what happens is, you get a child, and like a 4-year-old child, and you place him away from his mother, and you get him, sort of doing things, and he starts to challenge himself, right? He naturally starts to challenge himself, and that's the adventurer part of you. But what happens is you set a goal, and this child sets a goal, and if the challenge gets too hard, then the child just runs back to his mother and cries and abandons the challenge altogether. And that's the same thing that we do when we get older. It's the same exact thing. We say we're going to embark on a hero's journey. We say we're going to pursue our dreams, but then once it gets too hard, 92% of people fail, right? We essentially do the crying and running back to our mother. That's how human biology works. But so that's a good representation of the hero. Now we got to understand so here's the thing. So if I were to the reason why I give such a logical explanation as to why heroism fails most often is because I want to dispel the myth of heroism, and I think that's one of the blind spots in movies. You get a movie, and I would say this is like a myth, that every single time the hero is going to win, right? We know going into this that Moana is going to win, right? Whatever winning is, we just want to find out how she wins. We know that she's going to win. There's no hero story that ends with a loss, or very few. So The thing is, Disney movies miss that, and I feel like that's something important to note. Another important thing to realize is, if I were to tell you to follow your heart, if I were to tell you to be a hero, I would never make a logical argument. I would never make a logical argument, because following your heart is not a logical decision. 92% of people who start a goal fail. The only logical argument I could make is you could be part of the 8%. That's it. That's all I could say. There's no. The only thing that you could say to someone who wants to be an adventurer, which, I mean, hey, listen, I'm doing, and I know my odds, is that you can succeed. You can succeed. I put something in my journal every single day. I say, today I will live without fear, for nothing is worse than a life unlived. And I like that, because I believe that the secure life, the only problem with the secure life is it doesn't follow the heart, and that's not a logical argument. Every time you want to become a hero, you follow an emotional argument, and that's why we have these movies. The reason why we have these movies is because culture fills that role already. Culture will beat you down and screw you over and tell you that your dreams are not worth pursuing. That's the way that culture works, because they want to keep the head on you. The reason why we have movies is not to fulfill the rational, logical part of us that wants to be an accountant. You never see anything like that in a movie. The reason why we have these movies is to give you the emotional reason to follow your heart. And that's what Moana is. Moana is completely devout of the it does, for example, it appeals to the grandma side in you. It appeals to the Moana side in you, but it looks upon the dad as the enemy. When most people actually step back into their lives, right, we look upon the dad as something to be revered, right? Because we conform, right? We have a natural desire for conformity, and when we conform in any way, right? When we decide to become part of the 92% and stay within our slumber, as Sigmund Freud would say, we are literally following the father. We are integrating the father into ourselves instead of integrating the grandma into ourselves, and that's something that I find is, applicable, because then you look at your life and you say, which one am I following? And which one do I want to follow? First of all, which one do I want to follow? Because one thing that you realize is that you can't be a hero in everything. I think this is the biggest example, unless you're some crazy, Nikola Tesla or Elon Musk is a good example. You can't do everything. You can't look at the world and say, I am going to master every single domain that exists across the entire species, because someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson has spent 50 years just trying to understand astrophysics, and you need to understand that you cannot be Neil deGrasse Tyson while also being, I don't know, pick a good entrepreneur, Jeff Bezos or, Warren Buffett, right? Like, you can't be all of them. So it's good to conform in some areas. It's good to conform in, the things that you don't really care about. What don't you care about? I don't care about that's the problem. I don't know what I care about. I don't know what I don't care about. But I don't care about, we'll say, the people who make money in Dubai, right? The people who get very, very rich off in Dubai. I really couldn't care about that. Like, that really doesn't, I never think about that ever. It doesn't bother me. So I choose to deny that part of myself. I choose to be ignorant. And if somebody were to tell me about Dubai, I really wouldn't care. And I'll conform to whatever laws that, whatever rules that you want to add in. But what happens is, if you find something that is your calling, and you find something that you disagree with, or a goal to pursue, just a goal to pursue, then that's the way of looking at it. There's I had this guy named Kirk Westwood on my podcast, and he gave some great advice for entrepreneurs, and I really like this. And every time I come up with an idea, this is always something that I say, always something that I tell myself. He says, think of your idea. You think it's a good idea? You think it's a great business idea? Are you willing to wake up at 6 a.m. for the next 5 years to pursue this idea? And if your answer is no, throw it away. Or just, leave it to the side. Because you need to have the motivation as well as the validity and quality of the idea to be able to become a hero, right? But you cannot be a hero in everything. And you cannot, you're only so limited, so maybe part of being a good hero is denying the bad heroes' journeys and following the good ones. Maybe that's something. So Moana gets crushed, right? And this is the point where you realize that maybe for a lot of people, this is the point where, you run crying back to your mom and you say, I'm scared. I don't want to do this anymore. This is the point where, the average New Year's resolution fails on January 12th. So by January 12th, this is where most people run crying back to their mom. But obviously she's a hero, so she's going to keep going. And there's this idea, nature keeps sort of helping her along, right? Nature helps her along a little bit. She keeps going, and she lands up, she lands a little bit tough, right? And that's really, when you decide to go on any hero's journey, whenever you decide to pursue a goal, that's a better way of saying it. Whenever you decide to do that, you're going to get roughed up right away, and that's, perfect representation. So then, we'll stop for now, and then we'll go back a little bit later.